all my friends and stay in the shadows that do the job. So yeah, I always say that there's two Deans. I was on a call a couple of weeks back with one of the head of stations for the CIA, and he said, "I've just Googled you. You're a cyclist." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, there's two people out there. There's the one that the world sees, and there's the one that the world doesn't need to see."
Yeah, that's right. Well, we all have different faces we wear at different times.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a great show back in the UK when we were young kids. It was called Wurzel Gummidge, who was a scarecrow, and basically he just changed his heads. You know what I mean? It was a different character. So that's pretty much me.
So are you getting some time with the family as well?
Yeah, where I can, just trying to find that yin and yang balance, as if sometimes you get so focused on work and then something is going to be compromised, which is normally your family life, which comes first, which gets compromised first. So I'm always conscious of that. And my wife, who pretty much manages me, she makes sure that balance is maintained. It doesn't sort of tip one way over the other. But we've got our third child at 8-week-old she is. So
that's right.
Yeah, where I can as much as possible stay here. But where work permits, I still have to travel, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the same here. It's funny because any sort of I think it's our type of guys, right? Our typically our number one priority is our family and our kids.
Yeah.
But we'll get sucked into the world of operating or work or whatever you want to, the new operating, I say operating, but it's really just your job, right? What you do, but we take it the same way because we only know one methodology of like doing things.
Yeah.
And of course that's the first thing. Your first priority is always the first thing that suffers, right?
Yeah. It's normally those closest to you that suffer, but it's like you come from the military background and it's 100%. You give yourself to everything, and it's different when you're in the military because you have to go away because it's part of your job. It's more difficult when you're choosing to go away. For me, like I said, your family is your number one priority. So for me, it's always to make sure that my family are fed, they're clothed, they've got a roof over their head. So sometimes I sort of forget I just get so fixated on covering that. And actually, sometimes they're like, no, actually, if you come home for a bit, it would be nice. There was a situation. We
don't really care about all of that. We just want you here so we can go on bike rides and adventures together.
Exactly, and so also cognitive of the fact that when I am home, they get my attention as well. So try and limit time on technology. But there was a period in my life in 2014 where I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And I'd just come back. It was when I evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya. And I'd just come home from that trip. And I was literally, just laundered my clothes and got the bag ready to go away again. And my wife washes all my clothes, and one of the shirts had blood on it. And she's like, why is there blood on your shirt? And I'd explained that I was actually administering first aid at a road traffic collision on the border of Tunis and Libya. Mm-hmm. Sort of told her about that and told her I just evacuated the embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats. But it was almost, as I just told you, it was almost like a throwaway comment. And my wife was like, have you heard yourself? It was so nonchalant. She said, I was disconnected from society. What I thought was normal wasn't normal, and I was on my own in Yemen, Somalia, just so focused on building the business and getting money. And when in fact my wife, very successful herself, said, we actually don't need to be going away, this is your choice. So that was when the pin dropped. And actually the conversation is chapter 16 in my book, which is called Dead or Divorced. If I continue at that pace and taking those risks, I would either be dead or divorced. And that's where we sort of really had to sort of look at the yin and the yang.
Yeah. And unfortunately, if we don't have a good woman to kind of smack us the side of the head, we will just drive that train all the way to the end. I mean, how can you have a relationship by doing that job like that for so long? Like it's almost impossible. Like you said, like you're not even there. You're not there. How do you have a relationship? Yeah.
No,
at some point it's got to end.
Yeah, it's true. I'm very thankful that my wife, sort of, or my wife does, she manages me. She did understand that when I left, because when I left the special forces, I got injured. It wasn't my choice. I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sort of maintain that sort of, and that's what it was. I was trying to match the adrenaline rush that I had when I was in the special forces without actually coming to terms with the fact that I'd left. But she knew that if she told me that she wanted me home more often, I would probably resent her for it and just push even faster. So she sort of gave me that rope, and I nearly hung myself, and then pulled me back in. But she knows that I need to have a focus. Although I'm home, I need to have something that I could in the future that I'm planning for, to stay physically and mentally engaged. So she understands it, but she sort of manages that a bit more.
Yeah. So we actually, for those who listen, Dean and I met on a project. I don't know if it's going forward, but we met on a project. I think we absolutely crushed it. I thought we were going to be the best team.
Yeah.
And I didn't get selected for the project. I think because this is basically what they told me. I was a little too political, and they were looking for somebody a little more apolitical. I was too opinionated, and I do have some strong opinions, especially after the last 2 years in America. And anyways, so unfortunately I didn't get to work with them there, but we got to meet and became friends, and we'll I'm sure we'll connect in other ways in the future. But you actually are on a show in Australia, right?
I was on a show in Australia. So the show originated actually back in the UK in 2015. Right. So I got injured out of the military in 2011. I mean, in 2015, I received an email from a guy called Andrew Slater, and he says, look, we're looking at the concept of this show. Would you be up for a meeting? So I met with him. He flew up to Aberdeen in Scotland, and we sat down, and he sort of told me the concept of the show. It was at the time was called Selection, and what they wanted to do was get some civilians and sort of push them through a compressed selection process. Our selection is 6 months, but they wanted to do it in 14 days, and said, look, your name keeps coming up. Would you be interested? So for me, I was always conscious of the fact that I need to protect the Special Forces group. And at the time as well, I was smuggling people across borders, doing evacuations. I was doing a lot.
You were still working for your company, right?
I was still working for my company, and I was conscious that I didn't want to sort of put my head above the parapet, because for us, the world of media, it was almost like frowned upon within the group. But there was a show back in the 90s called SAS, Are You Tough Enough? And it was a train crash. It was horrendous. And so I always had that.
I didn't know about that one.
Yeah. A guy called Eddie Stone was on it. And Dermot O'Leary, who's actually a famous civilian presenter. It was one of his original shows. But it was a train crash for the Special Forces group. And so I was always conscious of that. And I thought, I'm not too sure. But there was a couple of my friends, one of my friends had unfortunately just come out of prison. He was struggling for work. There was a couple of other guys who had post-traumatic stress. So because they had post-traumatic stress, they couldn't work in the security industry. So they were on hard times, if that makes sense. And so I said, look, well, let me reach out to them. So I reached out to them, and I said, look, I am interested, but it needs to be cleared through the Ministry of Defense. So I wrote a letter to the Ministry of Defense, made them aware. Within a week, I got a letter back when I was in Libya, basically saying, step away from this project, which I did. I respected what they asked for. And I was busy, as you mentioned, on other projects. But the other guys, they took it and they ran off with it. It became the biggest show in UK on Channel 4 in 10 years. And because of the success of that, they've now got really high profile figures. And then, I got asked to do season 2, and it was the same response for me. But more recently, it went to Australia. And we'll talk about probably my bike ride project, which I did. Yeah. So my bike ride project sort of put my head above the parapet. So I was no longer in the shadows. But
so let's pivot to that real quick, because that's a pretty badass story by itself. So you used to decide you're not. So first of all, Dean's not a cyclist.
Not a cyclist. Yeah,
well, I guess you are now, but you weren't at the time.
Yeah, that was it. It was actually that conversation Alana and I had called Dead or Divorced. I'd come back from that, and Alana's like, you don't need to be doing this, come stay at home. And Alana was a successful property developer. But this period was 5 years after I got injured out of the military. So my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. I've been so fixated on work and keeping myself busy. I'd neglected my own sort of physical and mental well-being.
Is the injury, you discussed the injury in the new book?
The injury is in the new book. Yes. Yeah. The injury's in the new book. Yeah. And so Alana's like, come work with her, which I did. And I just bought a push bike off Amazon. I call it push bike. You call it bicycle. You don't push it, you actually ride it. And and the office was about 8 miles away and back. But just being physically active again, not like gym work, but actually getting the lungs going, the cardiovascular. I felt like there was a huge weight off my shoulders. But you can imagine with my backstory and what I'd just done, I wasn't, I was sat in these meetings and Alana could see that glaze and she said, right, you need to do something. So I always as a young boy, we used to get at Christmas the Guinness Book of Records. And I used to always be so fascinated at all these amazing achievements that people would do around the world. And so it was something I'd always remembered. And I said, well, I wouldn't mind doing a world record. And my wife said, well, what in? And I said, well, cycling seems to be good and it's not hampering my injury. There's probably easier ones like eat 12 Ferrero Rochers in a minute. So I said, well, cycling seems to be good. And I'd only cycled 20 miles maximum at this point. And my wife then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, which is 14,000 miles over 2 continents. And so I joke when I say she clearly wanted me out of the house at this point, to find that challenge for me. But for me, the attraction to that challenge was there was countries I'd never been to before. I was covering all sorts of temperatures and climates from plus 120, so plus 47 degrees centigrade, which I don't know Fahrenheit, to minus 18, and everything in between. And so, it sounds arrogant, but having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the world record, and Guinness came back and said, yes, you've been successful on your application. So I knew from what I'd achieved in the military that I had the mindset and I had the endurance. I just needed to do it. I just needed to channel that into a new discipline or sport.
Right. So, and when was this?
So I set off on February 2018, but the planning and everything probably started about 18 months before. So when Guinness came back and said you've been successful on your application, the original world record was 126 days. It was now 117. It'd already been beaten during that period of time that I was applying. But my wife and I do a lot in the philanthropy sector, especially with veterans. And so I now had the challenge, but I needed to do it for a campaign. I needed something to get me motivated to get up every morning and train. If you're doing it for yourself, it's a bit more difficult. But
because you're training for an operation.
That's it.
Now you have a new operation that you're prepping for. So it's like, that's all it is. That's your singular focus.
Yeah, exactly. So a good friend of mine is old Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. He and I met 15 years ago on a JTAC course, and we'd done a lot of stuff behind the scenes in charity. He'd come to a lot of the special forces events that I was doing, or I had a table. I had an intelligence fusion cell based in Mozambique and Tanzania. So I would identify the smuggling routes for the ivory going from the continent of Africa to the Far East. And so him and I would meet every few months in London, and I would sort of disseminate that information. So we had done stuff prior to this, but never in the public eye. So I rang him up and I said, look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. What campaign should we do it for? And him and his brother and Kate at the time, this is 2017, were just about to launch a campaign on mental health. It's called Heads Together. But it wasn't just the military. It was everything from postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, all the way through. And for me, I didn't really know much about mental health. I'd seen it firsthand with some of my friends, but I wasn't aware how big an issue throughout the whole of society. And so really it did open my eyes, and I thought, perfect. That's the campaign that we'll do for this challenge. But I then had to think of a message. What was the messaging? And I hadn't really thought of any messaging. I just did it because Harry told me to come in the room. And it was like, so I sort of sat on it, looked internally, and I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state, you know. And I was actually then challenged and told that I couldn't use it because it hadn't been scientifically proven. But I was like, I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I train. And so ignored them anyway and carried on banging that drum. And now, you know, 5 years on, is recognized as one of those coping mechanisms. So we had the campaign, we had the challenge, and I set a target of £1 million. And I now had just over a year to get myself in shape.
And then you kicked off. Where did you start again?
So I started off in Tierra del Fuego, Ushuaia, at the very bottom of Argentina. But when I was doing my research, you know, I was buying magazines, I was reading everything I could on cycling, because it evolved so much when I was a young boy in a BMX. You know, what I mean, there's a lot more gone into it now, and there's a lot of science around training and things like that. But for me to put the plan together, I wasn't getting the information I really needed to make a definitive plan. And so I actually reached out to the previous record holders, and they were what really surprised me is how open they were in sharing their information. So, you know, what I did was I just took all I knew from the military and just I just took a military set of orders, put it on this project, and just crossed out ammunition. And so I did my planning from that. But you look at, and it may be the same in the US, is like when we come off the ground, whether it's on operations, whether it's on exercise, or whatever serial we've just done, you know, we would have a hot debrief before you go away and do anything. And it's 3 simple questions. It was what worked, you know, what didn't work, and if we were to do that again, what would we do differently? So I asked those 3 questions to the previous record holders, and all their issues, they started in Alaska, but all their issues were in South and Central America. So I was like, well, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? You know, why not address those issues early if we're going to have any issues? And then at least when I get into North America, I know that everything's behind me. I mean, we have, you know, if you're behind target, you can make it up. If you're ahead of target, then perfect. And so that was my decision process to start from the south and go north. You know, everyone's like, why are you going uphill? But
well, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, if you have to eat a frog, right? Which frog do you eat first? The big one.
Exactly. Yeah. It was eating the big frog. It was South America.
And there was a point I remember you telling me in that down there in South America somewhere that you kind of hit a wall. There were some frustration points that you hit before you got out of there, right?
Yeah. So I moved the challenge forward a month because we were all ready to go. I had a big event in London, and I was just going to fly straight from there. You know, for me, it's like I didn't want to say goodbye to my kids for a week, come back, you know, confuse them and fly off again. And so moved the whole project forward a month. Moving it forward a month, you know, we were all ready to go, but on the logistics side, the shipping container was stuck in Chile. It hadn't made Argentina. And so my support team were like, well, we can't go until we got all the kit. And I just, you know, I went out for a ride for a couple of hours, and I made an assessment on the ground. I said, well, we have enough kit to go. And so decided to set off straight away with less than half the kit, and the rest of the kit caught us up. So that was the first logistics issue. You know, I then had strong winds. I had 50-mile-an-hour crosswinds. I'd never experienced anything like it. I lived in Aberdeen, which is the equivalent of Chicago. But these winds were relentless. And so, there was the nature that was just throwing everything at us. But after a week, you know, the weather subsided, and you know, I was on the point where I should be. You know, just for the listeners, the world record at the time was 117 days. And then when I was doing all the planning, there was a lot of things that are out of our control, you know, be it natural disasters or coups and things like that. So if we encountered any of them, I didn't want that to affect my target. So I had a target of 110 days, you know, as we call in the military, fudge. I gave myself that fudge of a week. So by the end of the first week with the strong winds, I was 39 miles behind target, but my target was still a week ahead of the world record. And then from then on, the weather changed, and it was all in my favor. So from a cycling perspective, it was a great decision. You know, the winds, I had tailwinds in Peru. Although I got food poisoning, I crashed the bike and got knocked off the bike. These are all things you expect on a challenge like this. it was in my favor. But from a logistics perspective, you know, if we'd gone from Alaska to Argentina, you could get the vehicle from A to B as long as you crossed the Darien Gap. We were having to swap the vehicles at every border crossing, which was starting to slow us up. And so to eliminate that, we decided that we would buy an RV and a 4x4 from Fort Lauderdale. It would get shipped to Panama, because the South America World Record started in Ushuaia and finished in Cartagena. You can't cross the Darien Gap without flying over or sailing across. And so the next phase would start in Panama City, but we could get a vehicle from Panama City all the way to Alaska. So the decision was to purchase these vehicles and have them there. I was in Ecuador and my wife rang me and she told me that the vehicles hadn't been loaded onto the shipping container and they were still stuck in Fort Lauderdale. So thankfully for me, my wife, who was the campaign director, you know, she had foresight, and my PA and two of my friends flew out and they drove the vehicles from Fort Lauderdale 4,000 miles in 8 days to Panama City.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And it was like, I broke the world record in the morning in Cartagena, 8. I mean, I was on the noon flight. An hour later, Alana and the team just handed over the keys and we were off again. So, you know, the real importance.
I was going to say, how did you cross the Darien Gap? But you just flew over?
Just flew over, yeah. You fly over. It's part of the record. You fly over and you start off from Panama City. But the importance of that was the team that no one sees behind the scenes that makes it happen. You know, as you see, you know, we have all these famous people you see doing great stuff. And I know for a fact they would never be able to achieve it, if they didn't have the support of the family or have a great network around you. You know, for our UK Special Forces, for every operator to jump out a plane, step off a helo, you know, go diving, take 7 other people you don't see. And that was the similarities in this project as well, is that, you know, people would have seen me on the bike doing the social media posts and putting the miles in, but if it wasn't for that additional support and effort, it would never have been achievable.
Was there a point that you mentally kind of hit a wall to where you're like, oh man, this is getting exhausting? I'm tired.
Physically, mentally, yes. You know, I thought when I did the world record, applied for the world record, there's no distinction between supported and unsupported. And I thought, well, I will have a support team. The more I have, the better. But the more people you have, you know, sometimes brings issues with it. You know, you've got more welfare issues and stuff like that. You know, I had to send the medic home on day 13 because he was bullying the documentary team. And you're like, this is a mental health campaign, and I'm dealing with these issues. So the actual bike ride was easy. You know, I say the bike ride was easy because I was on the bike and I just knew what I needed to do for that day. And it was all in my control. You know, if I didn't get there, it was my fault. It was when you're coming off the bike, I mean, you're dealing with issues and egos, and people want to put social media posts, and it's just like, it was annoying. But even to the fact that the charity heads together as well. You know, I broke the first world record, and 2 days later, I'm in Panama. Just outside Panama, and they still haven't even put a social media post up. You know, my PR team are like, this guy is raising £1 million here. He's just smashed the South America world record by 10 days. You haven't even put a tweet up. So it's actually, it's dealing with all that stuff in the background. You know, mentally, I knew I was going to, you know, as I touched on before, I was only 39 days behind target. You know, from then on, I was always ahead. So I didn't think I wasn't going to do it. It's just the manner in which we did it and who was still going to be with me at the end.
Finish line.
Yeah. And you know, and I always tell people as well that are doing their challenges, you know, for me, I always made sure that I was on target at the end of the day. You know, I made sure I hit the target I needed to be hitting that day, because, you know, some people I see that they're like, oh, well, I'm 10 miles behind today, I'll catch it up tomorrow. But you don't know what tomorrow is going to throw at you. And you could be another 20, 30 miles behind. And then mentally it starts eating you up. So for me, I knew if I hit the target, when I go to bed at night, I know where I should be. And from then on, I was always gaining. So there was never any doubt there. It was just managing all the background noise, as I say. But you know, the world record was 100 17 days. I was aiming for 110. I got into North America on day 70, and I was 14 days ahead, and I'm like, perfect. The world record is well.
Did you slow down, or did you just keep that pace all the way through?
Well, here's where it changes. Everything changes. So I get in, and I get into North America, and I'm thinking about the previous record holders. They've told me all their issues are behind me. And I don't know what it was when we got into North America. I don't know whether it was because, the language, it was almost like a war RV, like being on escape and evasion, and I'd hit the war RV. I didn't know whether it was the culinary options, food was better for us or not. I wasn't too sure what it was, but it was almost like a huge sense of relief getting into North America. And I got in there, and then within an hour of getting into Del Rio, I came in through Del Rio, and I had 5 missed calls off my wife, and my wife, being the campaign director, was keeping all those distractions away from me. So for her to call that many times, it was serious. And so I straight away just worried about the kids, jumped off, grabbed the phone. I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, yeah, it's fine. I said, "What do you wear? What would you wear to a royal wedding?" I said, "Sorry." She said, "What would you wear to a royal wedding?" And I was like, "What are you on about?" And she showed me the screenshot, and we've been invited she just received an invitation to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which was nice. And so I thought, oh, that's good. She goes, "No, you don't understand." She goes, "For you to get back in time for this wedding, you need to be in Prudhoe Bay by day 102. So going into the phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So yeah,
and it's not like you and it's not like you can go, "Sorry, mate, not gonna make it."
Well, whatever happened, she was going anyway, whether it was with me or not. So yeah, I had planned on maybe taking the foot off the gas and doing that. And then I got into Lubbock the next day, and we had 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes. And so I was now 2 days behind, because I had another 24 hours there. Back in South America, because of the security situations, I was cycling from first light to last light. It wasn't safe to cycle at night. The luxury I had in North America was I could cycle at night, so I could gain a lot of that time. So there's an app called Windy TV, which I was using throughout the whole project. And it's very popular with sailors. It gives you the strength and directions of the winds forecasted for the next, 2 weeks. And it's about 95% accurate. And hour by hour, you can see how the winds are changing. And so for me to get out of Lubbock, I had to cycle 340 miles in 36 hours to miss the next weather window, which I did. And so I just played chess with Mother Nature. The majority of my cycling was actually done in the evening. So the amount of highway patrolmen stopping me 2 or 3 in the morning, just asking what I was doing. No, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But I also use it to my advantage. I got to Cheyenne in Wyoming, picked up a beautiful tailwind, like 270 miles in 11 hours cycling, like a wingsuit on. And actually the irony, we talk about the security situations and all the issues the previous record holders had. The only issue we had was actually in the States. One of the support wagons got broken into in Colorado Springs. So where we thought all the issues were back in the South, it was there. So I had 17 days originally planned for North America. I cycled in 11 and a half days, and I caught that time up. And so I was like, perfect. I then get to a town called Whitehorse, and I'm sat there in McDonald's, and I am, I'm burning 9,000 to 12,000 calories a day. So I'm unshamelessly just eating anything I can. And I was just sat there and
high performance fuel, right, Dean?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we're talking about nutrition. I was approached by all these brands, these sporting brands who want to use this. And for me, I started cycling at the age of 40. I'm very old school. I was like, I'd never used gels before and things like that. And I'm old school. It was apple, it was bananas, but by the end of it, anything that you could get your hands on. But when you're down in southern Argentina, it's very easy to say this is your nutrition plan. It's whatever's available. Down there, it was like ham and cheese or cheese and ham baguettes. That was it. So it was whatever I could get access to. So we're in this McDonald's, and a friend messages me, and he said, "Look, have you seen this guy? He was a professional cyclist. He's already got 3 other world records, Red Bull sponsors him. He's got all the gear. He'd come out on social media that day and said that he was going to cycle the Pan American Highway in August and be the first man to do it under 100 days. So for me, I was like, great, because every time I thought I'd hit my objective kept moving. The target kept moving. So for me, I could have just carried on cycling, smashed the world record. But I thought, well, what if I do push it? Am I able to become the first man ever under 100 days? And so, I cycled for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in -18, just to make sure that I came in 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. So it wasn't the original plan. It's just how the project just kept changing as I was going. Every time I hit the objective, it kept moving. But for me, I sort of, on reflection, if I'd known about the royal wedding, if I'd known about this guy from day one, would I have taken 5 days rest? I probably wouldn't have. I may have burnt out. You just don't know. You just don't know what you could have achieved. And it may have been too overwhelming. But for me, thankfully, I was in a position that I could act on it.
Yeah, it was just a constant adjustment. Like, okay, this happened, solve a problem. Yeah. This happened, solve a problem. That's it.
Yeah, and I tell people, when I do a lot of the guest speaking, the importance of this was having a plan. Yes, have a plan, but as we know, the plan doesn't survive first contact. The success of this was actually being reactive to the situation changes on the ground, and I think that came from my time in the military. Is like. One of my sergeant majors, when there was ever a situation, his first thing was that, is anyone dying? And if it's no, there's nothing we can't do over a cup of tea. And so that's what it is. It's just change the plan. You can't control the uncontrollables. Just how are we gonna get there? The start point's always the same. The finish point is always the same. The route there is never going to be exact. If I did it again, it would be totally different.
Excellent, man. Well, that's a huge accomplishment. Has it been broken since you?
Yes, Michael went off and he broke my world record, but I met him in Vienna. I was on a bike ride between Vienna and Prague, and he said, yes, but you are the first man in history. I wanted that legacy and you took it. But for me, I'm not a cyclist. I did it to prove a point. I dipped my toe into the cycle world and dipped out. This is what he does for a living. So he's like, he's now trying to find another big challenge. Whereas for me, I'm like, well, I'm going to go find another sport and try, maybe upset that community.
Yeah, because if you guys look at Dean like in person, you're like, you don't look at him and go, yeah, he's definitely a cyclist. You're not quite built like that, but it's impressive as hell, man, what you did. It just shows the power of the mind and what the mind can do if your mind is strong and you've got some if you can plan and prepare, then you're going to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And it's believing that you can do it. I actually had originally when I was reading all those magazines, I got introduced to this cycling coach who was like the guru. He had his own column in a bike magazine, and I started off with him, but I didn't like his attitude. He was like, oh, we need to get this in, otherwise we're doomed. He was using words like doomed and stuff like that. And so I just dropped him. I didn't care if he was the best trainer in the world. And actually found someone local, a guy called Ken. And I walked in and he said, yeah, this guy walks in, he's 200 pounds, bald head, muscles and tattoos. And he tells me he's going to cycle the world's longest road and break a world record. He said, why would I even question him? So, but why would I? Why would I doubt him? But he, whether he did have his own doubts is fine. But it never came across. It was his positive attitude and things like that. And when I did complete it, he said, "Look, I knew you would do it, but I didn't realize you'd do it in such the manner that you did." But yeah, as you touched on as well, yes, I don't look like a cyclist. So yeah, I was 200 pounds and. Ken, if he had it his way, he would have me probably as thin as this pencil on day one, 2 to 3% body fat and things like that. But what I was sort of taking into this challenge was because of the enormity and, how long it was, it's a bit like selection. So we had to, this was like an Arctic exploration. I would be losing weight from the day that I started to the day that I finished. It's not a sprint. It's not a Tour de France where you've got a couple of weeks. So when I started selection and some of the other big courses in the military, you don't start 100% fit because you will burn out by week week 2 or 3.
I was just having this conversation about body composition and why you cannot be super lean, because you have to plan for that. Your body's going to is going to need fuel, and you're not going to eat it. You're going to have it on you.
Yeah. I call it the reserves. Yeah. So it's, you have these reserves. You start about 75, 80% fit. The first few days are always going to be hard. I think they're hard whether you're at 2 to 3% body fat or you're at 10. It's always going to be hard. But at least you have something to those reserves. And then as you start progressing, you start eating into that. You do lose weight. Yes, of course. But it just gives you that.
I've watched those guys that are super lean and super fit that show up that way. They crash. Yeah. They crash.
Yeah. I've seen it in the military as well. You see some of these guys, and they're cut. They look the part and things like that. But when you're on operations, and your operations, different when you're going out the door at night and coming back. When you're on the ground for 4 to 6 weeks, you need those reserves, and that's when they start crashing, and you see the difference. So that was my excuse for not dieting anyway. Was that? But I'm glad I did, because I started. I'll have to go back to kilos now, but I started at 90 kilos and I finished at 78 kilos. So I lost 12 kilos throughout, and I just couldn't eat enough. Your body, I was burning between 9,000 and 12,000 calories. Your body can only really consume 7,000 through food. The rest has to come through fluids. So there's little tricks like putting a teaspoon of castor oil in your water bottle is an extra 200 calories. Not that I did that, but there are these little top tips that you could do. But I think depending on what it is you're doing, if it's a short task, then not a problem. You can stay cut, but for those endurance ones, you need to be looking into them, into those reserves.
So Dean, first, that's awesome. Second, you're the Frogman. Now in the States, we have, the SEALs are called that, but you have an interesting, you're kind of one of the only individuals that have this. So explain how that came, and then you being in the special forces, where you came from, and how that's kind of unique comparatively.
Of course. So I had no aspirations to join the military at all myself. Although my father was in the military, my grandparents in the military, I grew up in a town called Aldershot, which was the home of the British Army. So it wasn't.
So they were all
uncommon.
Army.
They're all Army. So it wasn't uncommon to see guys, parachutists. It was the home of the parachute regiment, the Red Devils, all these guys. And so, but I never really had an aspiration. I always wanted to be a fireman. But I went to college. But my father used to take us surfing every summer holiday. I used to love getting in the water and go surfing. And so went to college, and after a few weeks went surfing for a couple of weeks. That 2 weeks then turned into 6 months. And this was 94. This was before any mobile phones. So my father then came looking for me 6 months later and found me working in this surf shop. And he's like, he's old school sergeant major, he's a sergeant major, Scotsman. And he's like, basically just gave me a bollocking in the ear, and he's like, you've ruined your life. I've only just turned 17, so you've ruined your life. What are you going to do?
You've ruined your life. You're 17 years old.
I'm 17. I've ruined my life. So to silence him, I was like, well, I'll join the military. And I was expecting a response of like, brilliant, I'll help you get there. And he told me I would last 2 minutes, if that. Which wasn't the response I wanted, but it was the motivation to sort of prove him wrong. But I was at the time, I weighed 67 kilos. I was about 5'7", nothing like the person, as you know, you look totally different from the day you joined. And and so I went to the careers office. I went in and signed up. And then my father, I could see, okay. So I came out of the careers office, and in the careers office in Aldershot, that I was joining the parachute regiment. My father's like, you bloody not. And he marched me straight back in. But my father was in the Royal Engineers. So he still thought, right, at a push, he'll probably do 3 to 5 years. He needs to get as much as you can from the military, rather than you giving your everything, get what you can from them. And so, but I wasn't, he'd never sat down and discussed to me about the orbat of the military, who did what and whose roles. Because my father was the Army soccer, I'll say soccer, not football, the Army soccer manager, player and coach. So he was what we would call a tracksuit soldier. So his career was based around his sporting abilities. So he wasn't a green soldier, as we would say.
Yeah, yeah.
So he never really talked about any of that. And so when he sat down and explained to me, he said, well, look, you've joined the Royal Engineers, you can still go airborne, you can go commando, do the commando course in P Company. And I was like, okay. So that's what I did. I then joined the Royal Engineers and never heard of the Royal Marines, never heard of the Special Boat Service. Joined the Royal Engineers. I did the commando course because all the commandos were based by the coast, which meant I could go surfing. and I did 8 years with Brigade Reconnaissance Force for Free Commando Brigade. I did a period of time, a year, as an instructor on the commando course. Majority of my career was with the Royal Marines and the Green Berets back there. I then got promoted to sergeant, and I was then the senior diving instructor at the diving school, the military diving school. So I had a real passion and love for the water. But coming from the army, to go tier 1 special forces, you could only go to the SAS. Right. The only guys that were going SBS were the Royal Marines. It was 100%.
Right.
But the SBS were losing candidates because Royal Marines can go to the SAS. So they were losing candidates to the SAS because not everyone likes diving. You know, it's quite alien for some. So it was just at the right time, the SBS decided to open it up, try service. So unlike here with DevGru and Delta, they have their own separate selection. Ours is the same anyway. So it's not as if it's a different selection. It's still the same selection for 6 months.
It's just where you go afterwards.
Where you go afterwards, yeah.
So,
you know, much to the disgust of my friends in the SAS, I was like, well, I'm going SBS. And, you know, they tell you as you know, on selection, you want to try and be the grey man as much as possible. You know, you don't want to bring any attention to yourself, whether it's good or whether it's bad. I think I was the grey man for about 2 minutes on a 6-month course. It was like, stop, because it was like.
Unfortunately, I've never been able to. I personally was never to be the grey man either, and it was never really good for me. But it's just the way it was. Yeah.
No, but I knew I wouldn't be the grey man for long anyway, you know, a bit of a character. But I did that 6 months, you know, start with 200, 8 pass 6 months later. And became one of the first army candidates to do that. And I think now 15% of the SBS comes from that army pool, which is great. So for me, you know, where the Frogman sort of came from, my mindset for, well, if I go SAS, because of my diving ability, I'm going to end up in boat troop. If I go to the SBS, they're all divers. Yeah. But it wasn't the fact. You know, you go SBS and they then do their dive course. So they're very new to diving as well. But because of my diving experience in the past, I ended up being the dive rep. And any sort of dive task we had within the squadron, I was on it. I wouldn't even go look at the all-bat because there was no fudge for any failures. We had to get the best team to get on board the target. Yeah. And so I used to get a lot of questions, you know, what's the difference between you, Bear Grylls, Ant Middleton, all these big names? I said, I was the Frogman. If there was ever a job, it was always me on that. And that's true. You know, whether it was operational or training, you know, you want the strongest team. Whereas for me, I'm like, get the weaker guys in, get them more competent. But we just didn't have flexibility to do that. It was just like, no, we need to get on board the oil rig, we need to get on board the ship. And so put a strong team. So that's where the Frogman, where you guys use it, Frogman. So we're not called Frogmen in the SBS, we're called swimmer canoeists.
Right.
So the Frogman's unique in the UK, but here it's everywhere.
Yeah. But for you, Dean Scott is the Frogman.
Dean Stott is the Frogman, but the frog is great because it's very similar to what I carried on in the security. You can survive in the water, you can survive on the land. There's even flying frogs. You know what I mean? It does everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, we geeked out over some dive stuff, some dive tech stuff when we linked up. I was talking about all the different gear and how you did what, and that's all because remember I was on a dive team for 5 years, both in recon and in special operations. Yeah. And just kind of the way it worked out. So it's
different,
a lot of time in the water.
Yeah, the diving, the SF diving was different from what I was used to. Yeah. In the Royal Engineers at the dive school, it's basically whatever tools we can use on the surface, we use underwater. So we do concreting, we do breakering, do demolitions. Right. So you're almost like very similar to the Men of Honor sort of sketch with the
Yep.
big weight kit. Whereas actually, when in the special forces, we're more swimmers. We're not divers, because you're shallow. You're just swimming to
that's what I did. The Navy, the big Navy stuff, they do that, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to do that, but I kind of liked what I did. Anyways, all right. So the book. Let's talk about the book.
Yeah. So the book. So the book's Relentless. When I finished my bike ride, I didn't really look beyond. I did the bike ride, so I wasn't smuggling people across borders. I didn't see it as a career in guest speaking or TV or all these other things, or even a book. And so I was asked if I would do a book. So the book got launched originally in UK. So this is the US version I'm now launching. And it covers...
When did the original one get launched?
The original one got launched in September 2019.
Okay.
But since then, me and my family have moved to the US. We moved over in October 2020, right in the middle of COVID. We had no real plan.
Perfect time.
Went to Mexico City for 14 days and then bounced in. Literally 8 bags, 2 kids and a wife, and we said we'll make it happen. Just while the world paused. It was a great move on our side now, looking back. But when I did arrive, People magazine, which is huge here in the US, they did a 4-page special on me and the family. I was lucky to go on Jocko's podcast and all these big exposures. So I reached out to my publisher in UK and I said, look, I'm going on these high profile media events. It'd be good to get some books here. And they just weren't interested because the book had already been out a year. So Jocko got it to #1 on Kindle. So my wife, being the brains behind the scenes, she got in touch with the publishers and was like, well, you haven't launched it in the US yet. We will buy the rights for you. So we bought the rights for North America from them and told them not to sell it here. So what we've done since, because that book cover would never hit the shelves in UK, not with an FN Mini-Me with ammunition around your neck. And so we looked at what
it's all good in America. That's how you sell books in America.
Exactly. But we looked at what worked with the book in UK and what didn't. So the book in UK was very dark. It's my face and a couple of frogmen coming out, and it says from SBS to World Record Breaker.
Yeah.
But there was nothing on the book cover to say what world record it was. So you're missing a whole community of cyclists, which are huge.
Yeah.
So 511. So I'm a brand ambassador for 511. They helped me with the book cover, and they said, look, that's your book cover in UK is very typical UK. It's dark, whereas America's about light and hope. And so we lightened up the book cover. We put the bike on the front. We Americanized the book as well. We changed a lot of the grammar. Changed the S to a Z. Added a couple of other additional stories in there. But in the UK, my book was endorsed by some great explorers. So Ranulph Fiennes, who's like a legend, SAS guy, Levison Wood, and Bear Grylls, which you'll know. But here in the US, people don't know those individuals. So we changed it. So we got Jocko Willink, Admiral McCraven, and Bear Grylls. And so, it's very much now being geared towards the American community with the same story, which they've not heard yet. So it's almost like a second lease of life, but more targeted for the American community.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on it, man.
It's gonna be
where's it going to be?
So it's going to be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, most book online stores that you can get, or my website as well. You can go to there for some of the personalized stuff. You'll easily find it, but Amazon being the main one.
How do we get signed copies?
Through the website, through www.deanstott.com is the signed one.
See, that's the key. That's the key right there.
You're all right. Yours is in the post already.
Yeah.
Good.
But people always ask me the same thing. They're like, "Hey, where do I want to get a signed copy?" It's like, "Well, just buy it from my website. Then don't go to Amazon. I can't control that." Because then they'll buy from Amazon, and then they'll send it to me. Hey, if I send it to you, sign it. Like, yeah, you can, but I sign them all going out the door. And obviously you do too. But that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Cut Bezos's his cutout of the book. He didn't do it.
No, exactly.
So from your this is like something I like. A couple things that I want to ask you. your experience and your perception. And this is general questions, but what is, based off your experience, like the keys to being successful as a man? So like if I was going to say, hey, what do I got to do to be successful, Dean? What are a couple, 3 concepts that will help someone be successful? Yeah. I've got 2 other subjects after that.
I think have a plan. Have a plan is one. What is it you want to achieve? What is it you want? You just want to better your life. Do you want to better your life for your family? So have a plan. Know what you want to do. And it doesn't matter how extravagant that plan is as well. The amount of people that tell me, "Oh, that's not achievable." Like, you can't join the SBS. It's achievable. My dad telling me I can't join the military. Achievable. There's no way you can cycle 14,000 miles. It's achievable. So have the plan, but also utilize the knowledge out there. That's what there's a lot of knowledge, and strange enough, a lot of people are willing to help. There are experts out there. So surround yourself, with the team. The amount of successful people out there aren't actually that good at their job. They've just got a great team around them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Me being one as well. You know what I mean? So it's, have a plan, find the right team around you, and then believe it's achievable. Because it starts with you. If you don't believe it's going to be successful, then it's not going to be successful.
I tell people that all the time. It's like the biggest thing that I can equate it to is like sports. If you're stepping on a field and you don't think that you can win, or you think the other team's better than you, then you've already lost.
Yeah. You've lost the mind game from the start. But yeah, it's achievable. But it's just like, and also don't think that as well. Showcase that as well. Negativity is contagious, but so is positivity. So if you're positive, then your team will see that in you as well, and you'll get the same response from them. If you go in with a negative attitude, how do you expect them to look up to you? So yeah, have that belief, right team, and have a plan.
Excellent. You do a lot of challenges, you do a lot of hard things. Is it important for men to do, and I ask everybody this, why do you do these challenges? Why after everything you've done in your life, like you have nothing to prove to anyone anymore. You've proven it. You're a tough guy. Why do you continue to do hard things and put yourself in these positions?
That's for me to keep myself physically and mentally engaged. As I say, I think everyone has to have something to do as in a physical objective. I'm not saying go cycle 14,000 miles. That's ludicrous. But even if you just train to do a 5K walk, you have to have something that you're aiming for. Because if you don't, the great analogy is the body is like a running river. It needs to keep flowing. It needs to keep moving. As soon as it's still stagnant ponds, infection, disease. So it needs to keep moving. For me, it's controlling the flow of the river. Sometimes the river's so fast, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a fast river as long as it's moving. So that's why I think it's important for men, is especially the physical activity. My wife sees it all the time. She knows if I'm a grumpy sod that I need to go out and go on the bike, or just go to the gym, just go do something. So I think we need that, and it's also something that's yours as well, which is away from your family. Your time with your family is good, but you also need to find time for yourself. That's why running and cycling are good, because I'm a daydreamer. Actually, when I'm on the bike, I have some great ideas. I'm just there on notes. So for me, it's just me on my own. But I think everyone needs to have something. But like I said, it's up to you how big that challenge is. The problem I've got is I've set the bar so high that I need to then find something even bigger. So, which is difficult.
Well, I mean,
and get it cleared through the misses.
Yeah, I think that, and it doesn't have to. I don't think it has to be big always, and especially as you age, it's just the point of doing something like you said. It's that, and that was a beautiful analogy of the stagnant pond, because that's what happens. You get stagnant, you get depressed, you get overweight, like things start to suffer. You get complacent in one thing, it turns into complacency in a lot of things. So that's a brilliant analogy. All right, the last thing is, what do you do because you've been deployed a lot, you've been all overseas a lot. Now you've got 3 kids. What do you do to really be a really great father? Like what do men need to be doing to be a great father?
I think the first one is to be there. It's easier said than done. You know, me and my wife talk about this quite often. Is like I think we always learn from our parents and their parents and what they did and just take away what was good and what was bad. You know, we're in a different world completely from them. You know, for me, I still talk about my father telling me I'd last 2 minutes. You know, words are powerful. You know, I mean, the fact I'm still talking about that, and even though I proved him wrong, is that I will always be conscious in what I say to my children and how it may affect them. But me and my wife were chatting about this the other day. Like my father, for me, I always, you know, he was old school guy, but I never felt I wasn't protected, you know, from him. Yeah. And so for me, there's certain things I can't do. I can't relate to my daughter on certain things that my wife can do, but as long as she knows that I'm always there. But I think the key one for me is having an ear. You know, they're your biggest peers. When people say, who do you look up to in life? It was always my father, you know what I mean? And so I just hope my children say that. But like, I know a good friend of mine back in London, his father was a pastor, and he had to book in a meeting each week to see his father, you know, for an hour. And you look at him now with his children. I'd never known anyone so loving to his kids, letting them know every opportunity how much he loves them. But he's obviously learned that from what he didn't want from his father, you know what I mean? So I think there is no right way, there is no wrong way. But for me, as long as they know that they can come to me and feel protected, that I feel like I've done my job. I'm probably not the most loving as some guys, and my wife, you know, my son, my children, my wife, like she tells me off all the time when my kids fall over or hurt themselves or do something. Before I'm the same way. I don't go in and give him the cuddle. I ask him, I said, oh, so what's the lessons learned then? Yeah. You know, so like that's
what I say. I had a 2-year-old, he falls down. I'm like, what did we learn?
Yeah. My wife's like, just give them a cuddle. Yeah. But it's actually backfired on me now. The other day I walked by and I stumped my toe and my daughter's out. So what are the lessons we learned? I thought it was brilliant, you know what I mean? But it's like, I should probably show them that a bit more affection. But the fact that they just feel protected, then I feel I've done enough.
Good. Well, man, it was good catching up. And guys, go grab that book. And then I'll put it in the notes. I'll put the link below the notes. Dean, where can people engage with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I put my head above the parapet. I'm now on social media, so I'm on the Instagram, Facebooks, and slowly coming back onto Twitter. But yeah, you can get me on all the normal handles at Dean Stott SBS.
Excellent, brother. All right, man. Well, you guys go check him out. Dean, thanks for sharing some of these stories with us and some of your insights of what you learned. And you guys, if this thing helped you, which I imagine it did, because it's what we do, screenshot this, tag both of us, tag Dean, tag myself, tag the podcast. We'll share it out. And other than that, go buy Dean's book. Go buy the Frogman's book. He's living in the U.S. now, so go support. You guys know the deal. Never quit, never surrender, always forward. Thanks, Dean. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Appreciate it.